Welcome to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corumbus. Our guest this week is retired U.S. Army Colonel Frank Athanason. He served during 3 different wars and was deployed to both Korea and Vietnam. He is a recipient of the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart, among many decorations for valor. And Colonel, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
It's a very distinguished career that lasts more than 30 years, and we're going to go back and focus in on a couple,
Yes.
and really several different parts of that career.
Okay.
But for the first couple of minutes here, just give our listeners and our viewers a brief outline of your career.
As a young boy, I lived in Tarpon Springs, Florida. That was a small town of about 4,000 population, 3,000 of which were Greeks. And mostly those Greeks came from the Dodecanese Islands in Greece. And they came over to start the sponge industry in the United States. My father was a shoe repairman. His family made shoes in Greece, so he carried on and came to the United States about 1906 with his brother. A small town of Tarpon Springs, very few, if any, kids went to college. My oldest brother, however, was an exception. He graduated from college 2 years before I was born.
Oh, wow.
So there was a big gap, and I
Yes.
mention him because he influenced my life later, because he also retired as a colonel with 30 years service. So I can come back to him. My father died when he was 65, and I was only 10. So in the meantime, my sisters and brothers had all gotten married and moved away, so just my mother and I moved from Florida to the Carolinas to live with one of my brothers. And if my father had not died, I would have probably never gone to college, because no one from that little town ever went to college. So I lived in South Carolina then during my junior high and high school years. And they only had 11 grades in South Carolina. So I was going to be a senior in 11th grade. My mother, who was a Greek school teacher, got a job in Savannah, Georgia. So we moved there with my brother-in-law, who was also a Greek teacher, so they hired him as a team. And we went to Georgia, and they put me in the 12th grade, since I would have been a senior in the Carolinas. I took ROTC. I loved it very much. My brother was already in the Army, so there was a connection there. I graduated in 1943, and I was 16 years old. So, of course, when I reached 18, I registered for the draft, and I went to Georgia Tech for my freshman and sophomore years of college. And while I was at Georgia Tech, I had an emergency medical problem, which would have made me delay going to the next semester. So rather than do that, in the meantime, my mother had gotten a job in Charleston as a school teacher with my brother-in-law. So I went to Charleston and went to the Citadel. And that increased my love for the military. I was at the Citadel until I was drafted into the Army. And when I was drafted, I had to go to Fort McPherson, Georgia to check in. And at the day that I was there, they were taking one Army and one Navy in line. Of course, I liked the military. I had a soft spot in my heart for the water, the Navy, so I wanted to be Navy. So I arranged in line that I would be Navy. So I got up to that point. They gave me a shot in the arm and said Army, because 2 guys ahead of me passed out when they got a shot. So that made me go to the Army without me wanting to go there, but it turned out to be great. I took my basic training at Camp Blanding, Florida, and the company commander happened to be a Citadel graduate, and he kind of looked over me and took care of me, and I quickly became sort of the favorite guy in the company because I was first in rifle shooting, mortar, map reading, because of my ROTC background. So I applied for OCS, and the war in Europe ended while I was applying for OCS. It was not a very easy thing to get into OCS then because the war in Europe ended, and right away they let all married men out, and they let anyone over 38 years old out, and they didn't need officers as much as they did before. But I was lucky, and I was selected to go to OCS, and I think my company commander may have had a lot to do with that. And again, I didn't know what branch I wanted to go to. They asked me, and I said engineers because that's what I was taking in college, infantry and armor. And the person interviewing me said, your initials are FA, so we're going to send you to the field artillery. Again, that turned out to be great for me. So I went to Fort Sill to OCS in a class of 50 people, and we got down to 6 from the 50, and they moved us back to the next class because it wasn't efficient to have a class of only 6 people. So I graduated on December 7, 1945. And I went to Fort Bragg as my first assignment. I was a 19-year-old second lieutenant, very green. And the first job that they gave me was to take 200 black soldiers to Germany. And thank God I had a seasoned black first sergeant with me because I didn't know what I was doing. And he taught me on the way over on the ship. So in Germany, I was there during the occupation. I took the opportunity to travel around Germany. I did go to the Nuremberg Trials, which there's very few people left that had gone there. And at the end of the year, they gave me an opportunity to stay another year or get out. And I decided to get out, go back to the Citadel, which I did. And at the Citadel, I just didn't feel right anymore because we were walking around with ex-officers' clothes on and the cadets. So I got a letter from the Army, wanted to know if I wanted to interview to go to the regular Army, and I said yes. So I went for an interview and did not pass it, or wasn't satisfactory to them, but I stayed on in the Army as a second lieutenant. And then I jumped forward to, I served with black troops at the time. Again, that was before the integration. That's during when President Truman signed an executive order integrating in 1948. I was with a black unit at the time. Then the Army asked me if I wanted to take a chance to get a regular Army commission by going on a competitive tour. So I applied and was selected and was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia. A competitive tour, you had to serve under 4 different commanders, and they all had to give you high reports. And at the end of the year, you went before a board and decided you were going to go regular Army or not. Evidently, I did well. I was selected to the regular Army, so they put me, would be the equivalent with the class of 1948 at West Point in January. They would graduate in June, so I was just ahead of that class. So, of course, I got a different serial number and a new track in my career because if you're a regular officer, you had a different track than the reserve officer. At that same time, I went home to visit my mother, who was living in Greenville, South Carolina at the time, and I met my future wife at my sister's house, and that's a story in itself. We ended up being married 68 years. After I graduated from OCS, I went to Fort Bliss, Texas, with the Air Defense, and I taught electronics and algebra, and algebra was the only subject I ever failed in college. So I had to stay ahead of the class, and I ended up being rated the highest and best instructor in the department. And then the Korean War broke out. And being I was regular Army and did not see combat in World War II, I volunteered to go to Korea. At the same time, I was trying to get my wife to marry me, and she did not want to do anything until Korea was over, because she had lived in Greece during the German occupation. And I didn't realize how important that was to her, but later I found out. So I did convince her, with my help of her sister, to go to the Justice of Peace and get married, and don't let anybody know about it, so that no one would marry her while I was gone. So she did on one condition, that we did not consummate the wedding until we had it in the Greek church. So I agreed to that, tried to break it the next 2 days I was there, but it didn't work. So I went to Korea as a young, secretly married lieutenant, and no one knew we were married except my sister-in-law.
Sir, let's pause
Yeah.
right there. We're going to pick up your story of heading to Korea and fighting for our country there when we come back on Veterans Chronicles. We are back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corumbus. Our guest this week is retired U.S. Army Colonel Frank Athanason. He served during 3 different wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and was deployed to both Korea and Vietnam. He's the recipient of a Silver Star, Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart, among many other decorations. We're going through the quick narration of his service, and then in our final segment we'll dig into the details some more. But when we left off, sir, you were deployed to Korea, a newly married lieutenant.
And when I was in Korea, when I got to Korea, I went up to join my unit. It was the 5th RCT, 5th Regimental Combat Team, the 555 Field Artillery. They called it the Triple Nickel. They were close to the Yellow River. We could shoot across the Yellow River. It was way up north, and the colonel told me he's not going to give me a job because the war was over, just about, and the unit was going to go back to Hawaii, and he would give me a job at that time. Well, a few days later, the Chinese came across. Make a long story short, I was there for 15 months and saw a lot of combat in Korea. One of the closest I came to losing my life was in an ambush in April '51, where my whole unit was ambushed, and I was left with just a few men surrounded by the Chinese, and my men wanted to surrender, and I said, we will not, because I had not slept with my wife yet. So we did get out at night, and I brought them through enemy lines back to our side. So Korea, I served as a lieutenant and as a battery commander, made captain ahead of my contemporaries. I came back and had my wedding. I had my honeymoon in Cuba. And I took my wife to the first post at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to a course I was taking. So she became an Army wife. Just from then on, my battalion commander that I had in Korea, which, by the way, I saved his life there, he never thanked me for it. But when he came to Fort Sill to give us our assignments, he did thank me at that time and saw to it that I got an assignment at the University of Washington as an instructor, which required a degree, and I didn't have one. And he got permission that I would be able to take classes. So I did get my degree while I was there. Then I went to 3rd Armored Division to Germany, and when I was in the 3rd Armored Division, I ended up in East Germany for 6 weeks, being held by the East Germans and the Russians. Then I went to Commanding General Staff School. At that time, I should have known that the Army had in mind to put me up the fast track. I went to the Commanding General Staff School, and after that, I served in the Pentagon. And the key assignment was to go to the Army War College. And after graduating from the Army War College, I got command of the 3rd Infantry Division Artillery, which was the largest artillery in the Army at the time, which again was a signal that they had something in mind for me. At the end of my tour, we had a lot of race problems and dope problems at that time in 1970 in Europe. I was able to handle it better probably than the other major commanders, so I had a very successful command, yet I didn't make general. I was moving up to be the chief of staff of the division, and at the last minute was told someone else would take the job, and I would go to Vietnam. So the someone else ended up being chief of the Army later. And I went to Vietnam again, which I didn't care to go, and came back from Vietnam for Christmas leave and went to the colonel section, and they said that when I get back in May, they want to send me to Joint Chiefs to get more exposure because I should have made general, and I said, I don't want exposure, I want to be with my family. So they said, you can have any job you want, we owe it to you. I never asked them why they owed it to me, but I have suspicion why they owe it to me. But something you can't ever prove. So they said, we have a job coming open in Greece. In May, we'll hold it open for you if you want it. So I went home, talked to my wife, came back, said, yes, we'll take it. So I ended up in Greece for a 2.5-year assignment as chief of the Army section at the advisory group. At the end of my 2.5 years, I was home packing to come back to the States, and the general asked me to go represent the United States at the Naval Academy graduation as my last job. I went there and found out that there was a coup in Cyprus. So because of my ability to speak Greek in my 2.5 years there, I became the ambassador's connection with the Greek armed forces because the Greek government collapsed. It was a dictatorship and it collapsed. So as sending over to the Greek armed forces, I was able to prevent, I think, a war between the two countries. I talked their head of their Joint Chiefs out of taking action which they would have lost. So after that, I came home and retired, and I did not want to go work for the Beltway bandits like my contemporaries did, so I went and ran the military order of the Purple Heart.
Fantastic. Colonel Athanason?
And that's where I'm at.
Let's pause one more time. When we come back, we'll dive into a number of those different events and experiences you had serving our country for more than 30 years. Our guest is retired U.S. Army Colonel Frank Athanason. This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corumbus. We'll be right back. This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corumbus, honored to be joined in studio this week by retired U.S. Army Colonel Frank Athanason. He served this country during World War II, Korea and Vietnam, was deployed to both Korea and Vietnam. He's the recipient of the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart, among many other decorations. And for the previous two segments, we got a very good overview from you, sir, about your 30-plus year career. But let's go back to Korea.
Yes.
That is where you earned your Purple Heart and your Silver Star, and they all are connected to the same action. So tell us a little bit more about what happened there.
Well, we were hit pretty hard by the Chinese and fell back. And there was a gap between the lines quite a way. And we lost a infantry company was cut off. So the regiment got a task force together to go forward to try to find that infantry company. and my battalion commander volunteered my battery to go with him. And we went in front of the front lines. And my battalion commander went with the infantry and saw a tank coming down the road very fast in a Jeep, and told me to get my guns out of there because the Chinese were right behind them. My battalion commander had been killed, and there was hundreds of Chinese heading my way. So by the time I could turn around, we started getting fire, and I looked to the front, and it was just like a movie, you know, cowboys and Indians. There were hundreds of them. I don't know how many were coming. So I started firing with all 6 artillery pieces straight into them. And I got my binoculars up, and I saw there was a kind of a heavy-set one in front holding a helmet under his arm. And it turned out it was my battalion commander. So I got up on a quad 50 machine gun and had fired right and left of him, and had all the others go out one gun at a time until he came up. We grabbed him, put him in, and the Chinese were right behind him. We thrown grenades, we pulled out. So that's where I saved his life. And we went down the road. He said, "Stop, I want to get in front of your troops and apologize for us running away from the enemy." You know, we'd have been completely wiped out. I had 1 man wounded in that operation.
Wow.
The next day, I was called to pull off the road and pick up what was left of an infantry company and put them on my trucks and feed them a hot meal. All during the night, we knew the Chinese were coming down the flanks, right and left of us. That was very poor judgment on the colonel's part, because we should have kept going south. So when we did try to go south, we were caught in an ambush, and we lost 1 entire battery. We lost 2 of my guns, and the 3rd battery was still north, and they found a route to get around so that they were intact. And when they found a route to go around, they took the back end of my unit with them, and I didn't know it because I had taken whatever men I could get and went up the hill to attack the Chinese who were firing on us, because my guns were worthless now. And then I realized we were surrounded, and it was quiet, so that's how I got them out at night. Then about a month later, my colonel woke me up. About 3 o'clock in the morning, he was brushing my boots, and said, "Hurry up and get dressed. There's going to be an airplane land on the road and take you back, and you're going to be decorated by General Bradley." So General Bradley at the time was chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And I got back there, and he gave me the Silver Star. And I was wounded in that same action.
What was that like to meet the famous General Bradley? Did he talk to you?
Oh, yeah. He had a very high-pitched voice. He said, "Son, you got to be careful, you know." He said, "I'm going to write a letter to your wife." Well, you know, thank God a month before that, I convinced her to tell her family we were married. Otherwise, she'd have gotten a letter from Mrs. Athanason from General Bradley. But she did get the letter, but the parents knew about the marriage.
That was a bigger secret than the Incheon landing, wasn't it? All right, let's move on to another thing you mentioned in passing a moment ago, but I know it was a highly stressful ordeal, and that was your 2nd deployment to Germany for a number of years after the Korean War.
Yes.
And you mentioned that you were held prisoner
Yes.
for about 6 weeks.
Yes.
How did that happen, and how did you get out of it?
Went over with that unit from Fort Knox. The unit went over to Germany. I was the operations officer, which was a major's position, but I was a captain. And I held that position for 2 years. And then the general at Division Artillery, at that time, the commander of the artillery was a brigadier general. It changed later to make it a colonel. He brought me up to his headquarters, wanted me to be his aide. And I said, "I don't want to be an aide." So he said, what do you want to do? I said, operations, that's all I know. So he put me in his operations section. So in that job, I had to go test artillery battalions in a training area. And there were 9 of us, got in his helicopter. 5 of us were from the artillery, and the others were just passengers. And we were going to go to the training area for the weekend. And I was dressed in the Class A uniform, and the others were wearing fatigue uniform. And I was wearing cross cannons with a missile that just came out that week. It was a new insignia, and the others were wearing the old insignia. So we took off with the helicopter, and it was supposed to be a 2-hour flight. And about 2 hours into the flight, the helicopter made an abrupt 180-degree turn. And I got up and grabbed the pilot by the leg, because in that helicopter he sits up high, and passengers are at his boot level. And he looked down at me and gave me the, I don't know where in the hell I am look. We landed twice to get instructions from farmers. The third time, we ran out of fuel and crashed. And we were held by the Russians for one night, and then they turned us over to the East Germans. And we stayed there for 6 weeks. And that whole 6 weeks was just continuous interrogation. I was singled out as being separate from the others. Although I was the 4th ranking, because I had a different uniform and a different insignia, they thought I was a missile person. So I was always treated separately from the others. And I became a pain in the ass to them also, to the point where they didn't allow me to speak anymore.
How so? What did you do?
Just cuss them out. And one morning, we were all sitting in this room with our underwear, and the flash bulbs went off. We turned around, and there were a bunch of news people there. They said they wanted to have an interview with all of us. Whoever he was, we didn't know if he was legitimate or not, slipped a note to one of our guys, and he said, I'm Seymour Topping of United Press. Please do the interview, because no one knows where you're at, and I'll be able to get the word out. So we kicked them out of the room, and we discussed it among ourselves. Some wanted to do it, some didn't want to do it, and I was for doing it. They said, well, how do we know who he is? We said, what difference does it make? We're not going to gain anything unless we try it. And I was told I was not allowed to speak, only the senior guy. And they took him in a room with all the reporters. There were about 10 of them. And we had to sit in the hall with a half door. We could see over the top of the half door, but we could only see our guy, because the rest of the room you couldn't see around the corner. And our senior guy was a major, and he was the weakest guy in the team. And I pretty much ended up being the team leader. And he would always look to me for advice. Well, anyway, they asked him a lot of stupid questions, and he gave them a lot of stupid answers. I didn't want to upset him, and I took it as long as I could, and I broke into the room, and I cussed out the British reporter that was from the British Communist newspaper, and the French reporter that was from the French Communist newspaper. The rest were all Eastern Bloc people, and I blared out that they said, you came to a sovereign country and you brought in secret weapons. You know, propaganda. We were going to end up going to some damn jail, and people would forget about us, because the Russians disclaimed any knowledge of us. So I shouted out, the Russians signed a receipt for me. I was interrogated by Russians, and I described who they were, and they stopped it. They came in and grabbed me and drug me out. But that broke The next morning it was in the New York Times. This guy was legitimate. He later became the editor, I think, of the New York Times. I think he's still alive. He's got to be in his mid or late 90s. And because I said that Russians had us, that broke the chain. And about a week later, I was demanding to see the president of East Germany, and they wouldn't let us do that. And I demanded to see the president of Czechoslovakia, because the whole thing is they didn't recognize East Germany. I said, well, give us the Czechoslovakia. And an elderly guy came in well-dressed. He said, I'm from the East German Red Cross. Get your stuff, you're going home. So we went up, got our stuff. It's the first time we moved in a not closed vehicle or not being blindfolded, because we moved us several times. We went to the border, and we met by another gentleman who's from the American Red Cross, and he said, we have not agreed to the terms, so please don't cause a problem. And I told him, if you have a problem, you drop your pencil on the floor, because we're not going back. We're ready to rush the border. There were a lot of civilians there that had to shoot us with the civilians around us, and I didn't think they would do it. So he looked over at us later and holding the pencil. That released us. So we crossed the border and came home. About 3-4 nights before we left there, I was taken upstairs into an attic with a small light hanging over it. It was like in the movies. I couldn't see anybody's face, and they put a piece of paper in front of me to sign that I did not say that the Russians had us and the New York Times was lying. And I refused to sign it, and that's the only time they really threatened me. They said, well, you're never going to see your family again, so get out. And the next day they didn't do anything. So long story short, when we got back, somebody knocked on my door about 10 o'clock one night. It was a young man about like your age. He showed me his ID. He was Greek American with counterintelligence. And he said, I wanted to come before, but I couldn't, but I wanted to come and tell you how proud I am that you wouldn't sign that document. Because our people really didn't know whether I signed it or not. It was just my word. I said, how do you know I didn't sign it? He said, the guy that was trying to make you sign it was one of our agents.
Interesting.
And he's been found out, and they killed him, but we did get his family into Switzerland before they got them.
That's an incredible story,
Yeah.
sir. But I've also mentioned that you served in Vietnam, 2 tours in fact. What stands out to you most from your service there?
Well, the first tour was with a called Army Concept Team. There was a very select group. Again, it was a signal to me that the Army was pushing my career rather than I was pushing it. I did never push my career. We were to study different phases of what's going on over there to do something better. That's the American way, really. So I was in with the concept team, and I did a study on the use of artillery in counterinsurgency operations. And the main thing that came out of that study was they were not using their artillery properly. The Vietnamese were not. Nor were they using the VT fuse, which was, you had to use that in wet terrain. So I got a lot of praise for that. And then I came back assigned to the 11th Air Assault Division. And I took over the battalion when it had all top-notch people, because that division had the cream of the crop. But they had fixated on helicopters and had forgotten how to use artillery. So I used the first 3-4 months to retrain them and train them also to fire 360. for Vietnam since I did that study. And then they got alerted they would become the 1st Cavalry Division and go to Vietnam. That's the first major unit that went to Vietnam. And my division artillery commander called me and said, meet me at the general's office. He wants to talk with you. So I went there and the commanding general said, you've already been to Vietnam and the policy now is you don't go back. Well, every lieutenant colonel in the Army was dying to get his ticket punched in Vietnam. See? So I would be cheating someone if I went back. So he said, you have to give up your battalion. I only had it about 5 months. And I said, sir, my dream in the Army is never to make general. It was to be a battalion commander. He said, don't worry. We'll get you another battalion in one of 4 places. I said, fine. Then he said, but we'll be back in 6 months. And I said, sir, you're not going to be back in 6 months or 6 years. And when you come back, we're going to lose more than the French did, and the people are going to hate us. And he said, I'm not so sure you deserve another battalion with that attitude. So my boss jumped in and saved my life right there. But my career could have ended right there. Now, that general I ran into in the Pentagon about 2 years later, and he said, you were right. So I don't want to mention names, but
Sure.
that's the problem is the Americans thought they had a solution. But you cannot fight a Vietnam War with a American-type soldier against somebody that lives on a bag of rice and is willing to give up his life for political reasons.
Our guest is retired U.S. Army Colonel Frank Athanason. This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. We'll be right back. We are back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. Our guest this week is retired U.S. Army Colonel Frank Athanason. He served during 3 different wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and was deployed to both Korea and Vietnam. He's the recipient of a Silver Star, Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart, among many other decorations. Let's talk briefly about a couple more things before we let you go. First of all, you mentioned your time in Cyprus, dealing with that crisis, 2 different roles over a 5-year span there. For those who don't remember, very briefly describe what the crisis was that kept you there and the role that you played in diffusing the situation.
Yeah, well, like I say, I was at that graduation, and I was in the reviewing stand with the chief of the Air Force, Navy, and Army of the Greek service. They were waiting for the president to arrive. The president was a general, and he finally showed up 20 minutes late, and he took him down to the end of the parade ground and was talking to him rather than came to the ceremony. And somebody came downstairs and said, call your office. So I went to the phone and said, get back here. There was a coup in Cyprus. Get back to the office as soon as possible. So I went back there. Now I'm packing at home to go back to the States. The NATO representative was out of the country, and the Greeks refused to let him come back. So there was an empty slot there. So the ambassador didn't have him to work with. So I was a senior of the 16 colonels in Athens. If you can believe that, we had 16 colonels.
Wow.
That's called, I'm including Navy and Air Force and Army, because we had a base there at the time. So the ambassador told my boss, who's a 2-star general, to come to his office and bring me along. We went there, and we could hear him shouting on the phone from down the hall. He was on the phone with Henry Kissinger. And Kissinger, I wrote what I thought the conversations were, because it's kind of obvious when you can hear one side. You know what the other guy did to make him say that. So I could probably be pretty much right. But Kissinger, keep in mind, General Ford was only president 4 days then.
Wow.
So we had the crisis in Vietnam of the North Vietnamese.
Sure.
And we had the Watergate.
Yes.
We wanted nothing to do with Cyprus, and that's why it happened. The Greeks made a bad mistake to overthrow Makarios, and the Turks took advantage of it. And the Turks were well within the agreement of 1960 that gave Cyprus their independence. So, as soon as it failed, the entire Greek government collapsed. The military held together. So the ambassador was trying to get the military not to do anything that would cause a fight between Turkey and Greece until we could get an ambassador over there to negotiate. And there was one on the way. So he turned around to me and said, "You know those son of a bitches. Get on the phone and call them, General, I don't know if I should be using names, but head of their armed forces, and tell them to cool it down till our ambassador gets there, because he's en route down from the States to Ankara, and after he leaves Ankara, he's going to come here." And he said, "Tell him to declare Athens an open city." So I said, my Greek is fine, but I don't want to get into the diplomatic language of open cities and all. I said, I'd rather go talk to him personally, that I can look him in the face and know that he understands what I'm saying. He said, "Well, go on." So I went there and found, that was about the 20th of June or July, whatever it was. And I knew the guy. He didn't speak a word of English, but I'd fished with him that previous summer at their summer camp. The Greeks had a summer camp for officers, and they used to give me a cabin there. So he said, "What do you want?" And I told him I wanted 12 hours, and he said, "I'll give you 20 minutes. I said, "No, 12 hours. And again, he made a remark that I didn't want to put in writing, because he's dead now. But basically, we'll burn our house down to get rid of the bed bugs. So I told him, please. And I talked him out, I thought, successfully. And I left, and I found out later, reading a book, that on that day, he ordered some Greek submarines to return to Greece.
So you were effective.
So if they would have gone over there and sunk a Turkish ship, there would have been all-out war. So that was one occasion. A second occasion, the Greeks did something that upset us quite a bit. And my general was told to get it corrected. And they wouldn't speak to him. So they called me at home. It was a Saturday. And told me that they finally said that they would speak to him. So go down to the Greek headquarters, which the Greeks called the Pentagon, which is a rectangular building. So I put on my uniform and went down there, and the chief of the armed forces, the same guy that I'd talked to before, said, "You sit next to me. When the Americans come, they'll sit on a couch." Now he left me out as being an American. So he always considered me one of them. And when the Americans came, they came in their golf clothes. They had been out playing golf. It was a Saturday. And he reached over to the head of the Air Force, that called the MPs and throw the son of a bitches out. And I grabbed him by the arm and said, "Why did you say that?" So we got into a big Greek argument, and my general sitting over there, not knowing what's going on. And finally he said, "You're in uniform because you're one of us." I said, "I'm not one of you, I'm one of him." So I went over, sat next to my general, and I quietened everything down.
Wow.
But they were ready to throw them out. And then my general had the guts later to tell me, "I didn't appreciate you talking Greek, and I didn't know what was going on." I said, "Well, you just get ready to throw your ass out. That's what was going on."
Sir.
So that's it.
That is quite a story and quite an anecdote to end on.
Can I make a closing statement?
Go ahead.
All right. You know, I don't know. It would seem to me you'd be more interested in World War II people. I didn't want to come in here and make you think I was a World War II hero or anything. I was in basic training when the war in Europe ended. I was in OCS when the war in Japan ended. But I do feel that I was part of that generation. I, myself, my wife, and my kids, I've taught to respect this country. I still get tears in my eyes when I hear the national anthem or hear taps. And I'm very concerned about what's going on in our country today. And I don't know if we'll ever get back to where we were. And I feel hopeless that I can't do anything about it. So I just hope that enough people wake up and stop this. People see me with this cap and they say, thank you for your service. And all I can say back is, it was an honor for me to serve. But we've got so many people in this country to thank for the service, the doctors, the teachers, you know, everybody.
Yes,
but
sir.
We've got to get back to patriotism and love of our country. That's all I can say.
Colonel Frank Athanason, U.S. Army retired, served for 32 years in uniform, veteran of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. I'm Greg Corumbus. This is Veterans Chronicles. Hi, this is Greg Corumbus, and thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles, a presentation of the American Veterans Center. For more information, please visit AmericanVeteransCenter.org. You can also follow the American Veterans Center on Facebook, and on Twitter, we're at AVC Update. Subscribe to the American Veterans Center YouTube channel for full oral histories and special features, and of course, please subscribe to the Veterans Chronicles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and please join us next time for Veterans Chronicles.